The grand hall of the Anderson family estate in Lagos was filled with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Over 100 guests had gathered for the annual family reunion, politicians, business owners, and society women draped in expensive jewelry and designer clothes. But all eyes were now on one woman standing near the entrance. Her name was Grace Anderson. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly round and heavy beneath her simple cream dress. Her face was calm. But there was something strange. She had arrived alone. Grace's mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Anderson, stood frozen across the room. Her sharp eyes scanned the doorway behind Grace, searching. Then her face twisted with fury. "Where is my son?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the music like a whip. The hall fell silent. All heads turned. Grace did not flinch. She simply looked at the older woman with quiet, unshaken eyes. Mrs. Eleanor marched toward her, her dress swishing angrily with each step. "You dare come here without Marcus? You shameless woman. You came here to beg for pity? After my son threw you out like the beggar you are." Before anyone could react, Mrs. Eleanor raised her hand and slapped Grace hard across the face. The sound echoed in the silent hall. Gasps filled the air. Some guests covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered and pointed. Grace's cheek burned red. Her hand slowly moved to touch the spot where the slap had landed. But she did not cry. She did not shout. She did not even look away. Instead, something cold and powerful flashed in her eyes, something no one in that room had ever seen before. Mrs. Eleanor stepped back, suddenly confused by Grace's calmness. "What are you staring at?" she spat. "You think because you married into this family you are somebody? You are nothing. Nothing." Grace's lips curved into the smallest, strangest smile. It was not cruel. It was not weak. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret big enough to burn the whole room down. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some wondered why Grace was not defending herself. Others felt something was terribly wrong. The air grew thick with tension. Then Grace spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said calmly, "you should wait for your son to arrive. There are things that need to be said today. Things that will change everything." Mrs. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Before Grace could answer, the large double doors behind her swung open. Expensive perfume filled the air. High heels clicked on marble. And there he was. Marcus Anderson. Grace's husband. The celebrated millionaire businessman. The man everyone called a self-made success. He walked in wearing a designer suit, his head held high. But he was not alone. On his arm was another woman. Tall. Beautiful. Confident. Her name was Lisa Morrison, and everyone in Lagos knew she was Marcus's mistress. The room exploded in whispers. Marcus's eyes finally landed on Grace. He saw the red mark on her face. He saw her standing there, pregnant and humiliated. And he looked away. What secret was Grace hiding behind that calm, dangerous smile? 7 years earlier, the story had been very different. Grace sat in a small cafe in Paris, watching the rain fall gently outside the window. She was 23 years old, studying business at university. Her life was simple and peaceful. That afternoon, a young man rushed into the cafe, soaking wet. His name was Marcus Anderson. He was handsome, charming, and full of dreams. He sat at the table next to hers and ordered coffee with shaking hands. Grace noticed he looked worried. "Are you okay?" she asked kindly. Marcus looked up and smiled, though his eyes were tired. "Just a bad day," he said. "Business problems." They began to talk. Marcus told her about his small companies in Lagos. He said they were struggling, losing money every month. He was honest about his troubles. Grace liked that about him. Over the next few weeks, they met again and again. Marcus made her laugh. He treated her with respect. He seemed genuine and hardworking. Grace felt something she had never felt before, real love. One evening, Marcus took her to the top of the Eiffel Tower. The city lights sparkled below them like stars. He got down on one knee and pulled out a simple ring. "Grace," he said, his voice shaking, "I know I don't have much right now. My businesses are failing. I'm not rich. But I love you. I believe your family name could help me attract investors. Will you marry me?" Grace's heart was full. She didn't care about money or business deals. She loved him for who he was, or at least who she thought he was. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They married quietly in a small church in Lagos 3 months later. Marcus suggested they skip the post-nuptial agreement. "We don't need papers between us," he said. "We trust each other, right?" Grace agreed. But what Marcus never knew was the truth about her family. Grace's grandfather had been a quiet, wealthy man. Before he died, he called Grace to his bedside. His voice was weak but serious. "Grace," he said, "I am leaving you a secret trust. It is under a different name, Sterling. The money is yours, but you must never reveal it until you are certain someone loves you for who you are, not for what you have." Grace had promised. The trust was worth millions, hidden carefully in offshore accounts. No one in Lagos knew. Not her friends. Not her new husband. No one. As the years passed, Grace watched Marcus struggle. His businesses kept failing. Investors pulled out. Loans were rejected. He worked day and night, but nothing seemed to help. What Marcus didn't know was that Grace was helping him in secret. Using shell companies under the name V. Sterling, Grace quietly paid off his debts. She bailed out his failing investments. She made sure his businesses survived, again and again and again. Each time Marcus recovered, he grew more confident. He started calling himself self-made. He gave interviews about his success. He believed he had done it all alone. Grace said nothing. She watched and waited, building her own empire in silence. But then something changed. Marcus began coming home late. He smelled of expensive perfume. He stopped looking Grace in the eyes. Grace hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks she had the truth. Marcus was having an affair with a woman named Lisa Morrison, a socialite who loved attention and luxury. Grace's heart broke. But she did not cry. She did not confront him. Instead, she made a decision. She would test his character one final time. What was Grace planning, and would Marcus pass her test? Grace sat in her private office in Victoria Island, staring at a stack of documents on her desk. Outside, the Lagos skyline glowed in the evening light. But inside, her mind was cold and focused. She had just made the biggest move of her life. Using her secret identity as V. Sterling, she had purchased Pinnacle Trust, an 800 million naira financial institution. The deal was done quietly. No one knew the real owner. Grace leaned back in her chair and thought about Marcus. She had given him love. She had given him loyalty. She had saved his businesses without asking for thanks. And now he was planning to leave her. The private investigator's report lay open in front of her. Photos of Marcus and Lisa at expensive restaurants. Text messages full of lies. Plans to divorce Grace after the baby was born. Grace touched her growing belly gently. Her daughter would be born in 2 months. She had named her already in her heart, Hope. A week later, Marcus came to her in a panic. His face was pale and sweaty. He had just received a rejection letter from every bank in Lagos. His latest business deal was falling apart. He needed 50 million naira urgently, or he would lose everything. "Grace," he begged, holding her hands. "I don't know what to do. No one will lend to me. I'm finished." Grace looked at him calmly. "Have you tried Pinnacle Trust?" she asked. "I heard they help businessmen in trouble." Marcus's eyes lit up. "Pinnacle Trust? I didn't think of them. Do you think they'll approve me?" Grace smiled softly. "You should try. What do you have to lose?" Marcus rushed to Pinnacle Trust the next morning. He filled out the loan application, his hands shaking with hope. A week later he received a call. His loan had been approved, 50 million naira. Marcus nearly cried with relief. He didn't bother reading the contract carefully. He just signed every page and collected the money. What he didn't see was the small clause buried deep in the contract. It was written in clear legal language, but Marcus had been too excited to notice. The clause said this: if the borrower abandons his family or pregnant spouse, all assets tied to this loan will be transferred to the lender. It was called a morality clause. And Grace had written it herself. 3 weeks later, the rain came. It was a Friday evening. Grace stood outside their home in Lekki, holding her umbrella. She had just returned from a doctor's appointment. Her belly was heavy now and her feet ached. Marcus's car pulled into the driveway. But he didn't get out to help her. Instead, he rolled down the window and looked at her with cold eyes. "Grace," he said flatly, "I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. The marriage. The baby. I need space." Grace's heart stopped. Rain poured around her, soaking her shoes. "Marcus, I'm 7 months pregnant. Where will I go?" Marcus looked away. "That's not my problem anymore. I've made my choice." He rolled up the window and drove away, leaving her standing there in the rain. Alone. Abandoned. Humiliated. Grace stood there for a long time, water dripping from her umbrella. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from something else. Anger. Clarity. Power. She walked slowly into the house, dried herself off and sat at the kitchen table. Then she pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. It was a letter. Not a legal document. Not a threat. Just words, honest, painful, and true. She wrote about love. About trust. About the kind of man their daughter would need him to be. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. She would give it to him when the time was right. But first, there was something else she needed to do. Grace picked up her phone and called her lawyer. "It's time," she said quietly. "Activate the morality clause." Would Marcus realize what he had done before it was too late? The day of the Anderson family reunion arrived. Grace stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress. Her belly was large now and moving was difficult. But her face was calm. She had prepared for this moment for weeks. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus's mother, Mrs. Eleanor. "Don't bother coming if Marcus isn't with you. We don't entertain abandoned women here." Grace smiled and put the phone away. She called her driver. "Take me to Lecky," she said. "To the Anderson estate." When the car pulled up to the massive gate, guests were already arriving. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Music floated from inside the hall. Laughter and voices filled the air. Grace stepped out of the car slowly, one hand supporting her belly. She wore no jewelry. No makeup. Just a simple cream dress and flat shoes. She looked ordinary. Forgettable. But the moment she walked through the door, everything stopped. Mrs. Eleanor spotted her immediately. Her face went from shock to rage in seconds. She pushed through the crowd, her eyes blazing. "Where is my son?" she shouted. Grace said nothing. She just stood there calm and still. Mrs. Eleanor's voice grew louder. "You shameless woman. You came here alone to embarrass this family. My son left you because you are worthless. You are nothing but a beggar." Then came the slap. It was hard and sharp. Grace's head turned slightly from the force. A red mark bloomed on her cheek. The guests gasped. Some looked away in discomfort. Others pulled out their phones to record. Grace touched her cheek slowly. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply looked at Mrs. Eleanor with cold, clear eyes. "You should wait," Grace said softly. "Your son will be here soon. And when he arrives, the truth will come out." Mrs. Eleanor frowned. "What truth? What are you talking about?" Before Grace could answer, the doors opened again. Marcus walked in, his arm wrapped around Lisa Morrison. She wore a tight red dress and diamonds around her neck. She smiled like she owned the world. The guests whispered loudly now. Some pointed. Others shook their heads. Marcus's affair was no longer a secret. It was on full display. Marcus saw Grace standing there. He saw the red mark on her face. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt maybe. Or shame. But then he looked away and kept walking. That was when Grace decided it was time. She stepped forward into the center of the hall. Her voice was calm but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Marcus," she said, "do you remember the loan you took from Pinnacle Trust 3 months ago?" Marcus stopped walking. His face went pale. What are you talking about?" Grace smiled. 50 million naira. You were so desperate. So grateful when it was approved. Do you remember who approved it?" Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came out. Grace continued. "It was me. I was the executive who reviewed your application. I was the one who said yes." The room exploded in confused whispers. Marcus stared at her like she was a stranger. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You don't work at Pinnacle Trust. You don't?" "I own it," Grace said simply. Silence. Complete, crushing silence. Mrs. Eleanor's face went white. Lisa's smile disappeared. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. Grace's voice remained steady. "I am V. Sterling. I own Pinnacle Trust. I also own the shell companies that saved your businesses 7 times in the last 5 years. Every time you thought you were self-made, Marcus, it was me. I was the one keeping you afloat." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. No, that's not possible. I built everything myself." "You built nothing," Grace said coldly. "You spent my money and called it success. What would happen now that the truth was finally out?" Marcus's legs felt weak. He gripped the edge of a nearby table to steady himself. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what Grace had just said. "You're lying," he whispered. "You're just trying to humiliate me." Grace reached into her handbag and pulled out a brown folder. She opened it calmly and began reading aloud. March 2019. Your construction company lost a 12 million naira contract. Sterling Holdings paid your debts through a shell company. You never knew. Marcus's face went pale. August 2020. Your investment in Abuja real estate failed. You were about to lose everything. Sterling Capital bailed you out. Again, you never knew. She flipped another page. January 2022. Your supplier threatened to sue you. 20 million naira. Gone overnight. Paid by V. Sterling. The guests stood frozen, listening to every word. Some recorded on their phones. Others whispered in shock. Grace closed the folder and looked directly at Marcus. I saved you 7 times, Marcus. 7 times. And you called yourself self-made. Marcus's voice cracked. What? Why would you do that? Because I loved you, Grace said simply. I wanted you to succeed. I wanted to see the man you could become. Tears filled Marcus's eyes, but Grace was not finished. But then you abandoned me, she continued. You left me in the rain, 7 months pregnant, to be with her. She pointed at Lisa, who stood frozen, her face red with shame. Grace's voice grew colder. And when you did that, you triggered something. Do you remember signing the loan contract, Marcus? Did you read it carefully? Marcus's heart sank. What are you talking about? There was a clause, Grace said. A morality clause. It stated clearly that if you abandoned your pregnant wife, all assets tied to the loan would transfer to me. You signed it. You agreed to it. Marcus's hands began to shake. No. No, I didn't. You didn't read it, Grace finished. You were too desperate. Too excited. So you signed away everything. Mrs. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling. You tricked him. Grace turned to her slowly. I gave him a loan. I gave him clear terms. He chose not to read them. That is not a trick, Mrs. Eleanor. That is consequence. The room was silent. Even the music had stopped. Marcus fell to his knees, his head in his hands. I've lost everything, he whispered. Everything. Grace looked down at him. For a moment, her face softened. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a white envelope. It was old, slightly worn. This is the letter I wrote the night you left me in the rain, she said quietly. I was going to give it to you when you came back to apologize. But you never did. She handed it to him. Marcus took it with trembling hands. He opened it slowly and began to read. His eyes moved over the words. Words about love, about responsibility, about the kind of father their daughter would need. The letter did not beg him to come back. It did not ask for money or revenge. It simply asked one question. What kind of man do you want to be? Tears streamed down Marcus's face. He looked up at Grace, broken and ashamed. I don't know, he whispered. I don't know how to be better. Grace knelt down slowly, her pregnant belly making it difficult. She looked him in the eyes. Then start by being honest, she said. Admit what you've done. Admit you were wrong. That is where change begins. Marcus nodded, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Grace stood up slowly. She looked around the room at the guests, at Mrs. Eleanor, at Lisa. I could destroy you completely, Marcus, she said. I could take everything and leave you with nothing. But I won't. Marcus looked up, confused. I'm giving you a choice, Grace continued. You can fight me in court. You can try to take back what you've lost. And you will lose, publicly, painfully, and permanently. Or, she paused. Or you can accept what has happened. You can take responsibility. You can become the man our daughter deserves to call her father. What choice would Marcus make, and could he ever truly change? Marcus stared at the letter in his hands, tears streaming down his face. The words blurred as he read them again and again. The letter was not angry. It was not cruel. It simply asked him one question. What kind of man do you want to be? He looked up at Grace, his voice breaking. I don't know how to be better. I've ruined everything. Grace's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Admitting that is the first step, Marcus. Honesty is where transformation begins. She stood straighter, addressing not just Marcus but the entire room. I could destroy you completely right now. I could take you to court and humiliate you publicly. You would lose everything, your reputation, your freedom, everything. Marcus's whole body trembled. But I'm giving you a choice, Grace continued. You can fight me legally and lose everything in front of the whole world. Or you can accept what you've done, take responsibility, and try to become a man our daughter can respect one day. The room held its breath. Everyone waited for Marcus's answer. Marcus slowly stood up, his legs weak. He looked at Lisa, who stood frozen and useless beside him. Then he looked back at Grace, the woman he had betrayed, humiliated, and abandoned. I accept, he whispered. I accept responsibility. I don't want to fight you. I just I just want to try to be better. Grace nodded once. Then prove it. Not with words. With actions. Marcus left the reunion that night in silence, his head bowed in shame. Lisa tried to follow him, but he told her to leave. She disappeared from his life that very night, moving on to another wealthy man within weeks. The months that followed were hard for Marcus. He moved out of his luxury penthouse in Ikoyi and into a small apartment in Yaba. He sold his expensive cars and designer clothes. He gave up the fake billionaire lifestyle he had built on Grace's secret money. He found a modest job at a small consulting firm, earning just enough to live simply. But more importantly, he entered therapy. Twice a week he sat in a counselor's office and faced the painful truth about himself. His pride, his selfishness, his lies. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. There were days he wanted to quit. Days he felt crushed by shame. But he kept going because he had made a promise. And slowly Marcus began to change. He became a present, consistent father to Hope. Every Saturday he came to spend time with his daughter, feeding her, playing with her, showing up when he said he would. Grace watched carefully but kept her distance. They would never be husband and wife again. But they built something new, an honest co-parenting relationship based on accountability, not romance. Mrs. Eleanor also faced herself after that night. The memory of slapping Grace haunted her. One afternoon she came to Grace's door, her pride finally broken. I was wrong, Mrs. Eleanor said quietly, tears in her eyes. I was cruel. I believed my son could do no wrong. Please forgive me. Grace looked at her for a long moment. Forgiveness takes time, Mrs. Eleanor. But I will not carry bitterness. That is a start. Mrs. Eleanor nodded and left. But she returned weeks later with gifts for Hope. She came again and again, slowly becoming the kind of grandmother the child deserved. The entire Anderson family began to shift. Some members, unable to survive without status and hierarchy, drifted away. Others stayed and learned to value honesty over appearances. Grace's true identity as V. Sterling eventually became public. Newspapers called her the secret billionaire. Magazines wanted interviews. People debated whether she was a hero or too ruthless. Grace ignored the noise. She had never done it for fame. Instead, she used her new visibility for good. She converted several of Marcus's old properties into affordable housing specifically for abandoned families, women and children who had nowhere else to go. She started a mentorship program for women who had been dismissed, betrayed, or told to stay silent. She taught them to build their own power, to trust their worth, and to demand accountability from the people in their lives. One quiet evening, Grace sat in her office in Victoria Island. Baby Hope slept peacefully in a crib beside her desk. Rain fell gently outside the window, washing the streets of Lagos clean. Grace's phone buzzed. It was an email from a young woman named Blessing. She had just left her husband after years of abuse. She had no money, no job, and nowhere to turn. Grace smiled and typed a reply, "Come to my office tomorrow morning. You are not alone. We will help you start again." She looked over at Hope, her tiny daughter sleeping soundly. Grace whispered, "You will grow up knowing your strength. You will never hide who you are." Grace stood and walked to the window watching the rain fall. She had been tested, betrayed, slapped in front of a crowd, abandoned while pregnant. But she had not broken. She had waited. She had planned. And when the time came, she had shown the world that real power was not about cruelty or revenge. It was about wisdom, accountability, and the courage to rebuild. Grace smiled as the rain continued to fall. Another woman would walk through her door tomorrow, broken and afraid. And Grace would help her rise just as she had risen. Because that was what true strength looked like. Not loud, not bitter, not cruel. Just steady, just patient, just powerful. And that was enough. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?